I was born in India, then lived in California for 25 years before moving to Myanmar. Growing up in India, I was used to blackouts, just like here in Myanmar. But I never thought that one day California will be in the same boat. California, one of the richest states in the US, has a new normal: blackouts. These blackouts are not caused by shortage of electricity like here in Myanmar. They're preemptive measures by the local utilities to prevent fires. The local utilities, the likes of YESC, MESC, and ESC here in Myanmar, turn off their big power lines whenever they fear that they could lead to fires. And that is because these power lines have caused many fires. In 2018, in one of the biggest and deadliest fires, 600 square kilometers of land was burned down, destroying everything in its path, including an entire town, and claiming 85 lives. So now PG&E, one of the biggest utility in the country, just turns off the power during the dry and windy season when there is high fire risk. And when they do that, all the cities and towns receiving power through those power lines are left without power. Imagine that if, due to a fire risk in Bago division, we have to turn off the big power lines bringing power from Kea to Yangon in the months of March and April when it is hot and there is high fire risk. Can you imagine that? Now let me explain why that happens and why it matters, even here in Myanmar. In the last century, when the current electrical infrastructure was developed, we had to generate electricity from sources like hydro, just like we do here in Myanmar. Now the trouble with hydro is that you need the river water flowing down from the top of a hill from a significant height. So we have to build these hydropower plants like the Upper Panglong project near the hills of Kea and Shan. What that means is that we can only generate electricity far away from where we need it. For example, we need electricity here in Yangon, but there are no hills with rivers flowing down near here. So we have to move the electricity all the way from Kea or Shan using what are called transmission lines. Transmission lines are those big power lines that you would normally see while driving along the highway. Such a system of generating lots of power from a big power plant, be it hydro or thermal, and then moving the electricity using transmission lines is called a centralized generation and distribution system. Now, these transmission lines are not like the ordinary power lines that come into our homes or businesses. These power lines carry a lot of energy. So sometimes, due to a fault or high winds, they can create really big sparks that could cause the bush or the grass underneath them to catch fire. Now, risk of fire and blackouts is not the only drawback of the centralized power system. A single electrical failure plunged a large part of the South American continent into darkness, disrupting the lives of 48 million people. And it's not just what has happened, but what could happen. Blackouts can be caused by cyber attacks of the centralized system. As a result of all these issues with the centralized system, even in countries with 100% electrification, microgrid utilities are on the rise. Like this community that is helping themselves by building a microgrid utility. A microgrid utility is a small utility. That is, they serve a small area or a campus. If it serves a town or a number of villages, like here in Myanmar, we call them a mini-grid. A mini-grid and a microgrid are essentially the same, but they differ in size. Both of them generate the electricity locally and distribute it over not more than a few kilometers. And modern microgrids and mini-grids use renewable sources of energy like solar. Because the electricity is generated near where we need it, where people live, say using solar, and the sun shines everywhere, there is no need to move the electricity over hundreds of kilometers using big power lines. Such a system of mini-grids and microgrids is called a decentralized generation and distribution system. Decentralized generation has been enabled by advances in technologies like solar and the widespread adoption worldwide and the associated price drops. So, even in countries without 100% electrification, like India and Nigeria, they're betting on mini-grids big time. In India, they expect 10,000 mini-grids. In Nigeria, they want to electrify the remaining 40% of their population using mini-grids. There is a paradigm shift happening in the power sector worldwide. There is a new way for us to get our electricity. Now, here in Myanmar, the centralized system reaches only about 35 to 40% of the population. That means 60% of the population, mostly living in rural areas, have none of these big power lines come anywhere near the villages where they live. And the World Bank estimates that Myanmar needs $20 to $30 billion to complete the centralized system and to achieve 100% electrification as planned in the National Electrification Plan. However, 5 years after the plan was adopted, those funds are yet to be identified. Now, here's the thing. With mini-grids and microgrids, we no longer have to wait for the government to do something. Businesses can set up microgrids in their campuses, on the rooftops of buildings and factories to help themselves and to help the country to reduce the burden on the already overburdened centralized system. Entrepreneurs and private companies can build mini-grids using solar to electrify villages that are far away from the centralized system. I want to leave you with a thought. Perhaps Myanmar can leapfrog into the future by embracing mini-grids and microgrids to electrify the rest of the country and to stamp out blackouts forever.